Hello everybody, happy Sunday. We are going live today with Caryn and we're going to be talking about the Enneagram. And I wish I could give more of an introduction, but I can't because I don't know enough. So we're going to wait for Caryn. And she's here. Thank you, whoever is joining. Nice to see you guys on a Sunday. Hi, Caryn. Awesome.
Hi.
That was fast.
Thank you. I'm getting better at joining.
All right, awesome. Yeah, and I'm getting better at inviting. I think I'm figuring this out finally. All right, I said I can't even give an introduction because I don't know enough. So I'm going to let you have the floor from the get-go.
Okay.
Am I pronouncing it correctly?
You are pronouncing it correctly.
Okay.
As far as I know of how to pronounce it. And I will say that I'm going to ask you, Faye, of course, because I've read about this for years. So sometimes, when you're used to something, you don't realize that parts of it can be confusing. So I'll ask you to interrupt me and just ask me to clarify anything I need
Totally.
to.
Okay. I will. Yeah, I'm good at that.
Okay. So the Enneagram is really more.
If I'm looking down, I'm taking notes.
No problem.
All right.
The Enneagram is more of a philosophy. It's not based purely in psychology. There is some psychology. It happens to be there are explanations from Judaism. When we break down the personality types, some people say that it correlates to the midos, which you might recognize as you hear the names or motivations. So though it's not psychology and I wasn't trained in school in it, when I was in my early 20s, a while ago, a friend of mine introduced me to this. And at first it was really fun. It was just a fun thing, these personality classifications. That's so fun. Let's figure out who we are. It's very much the age for that. Okay. And as I got older, I thought, what is this really useful for? When you're young, you can go over to everybody in the street and be like, you seem like this number and you seem like that number. But as we begin to learn that that's not really boundaried and we don't want to go over to everybody and just tell them who they are. Yeah. What I find more useful is understanding which the Enneagram, what it does, what makes it different is it asks, what is the motivation behind the personality? What might this person, and this is where it really attracts me and has this more psychological part to it than maybe some of the other systems, and also will relate to things like attachment, where it asks, what have I been through in life that leads me to make decisions, to have a certain viewpoint, to speak and relate in a certain way? And that's really my interest in the Enneagram. That's where I really find its usage. So I don't use it in my practice all the time. If I have a client who has interest or brings it up to me, I happen to have studied it, so I will. But it's even just in regular life, in understanding, why do I do things a certain way? Why does it seem like the right way to me? What is it about myself that makes me go about it this way? And we'll have interaction with people where we may say, why is she doing it like that? I wouldn't have done it that way, right? We can have a conflict with, I find it's like the greatest in a family situation. Again, one of those Hanukkah parties, holiday parties, where it's just like, what is happening here? And just taking a moment and thinking, again, you don't have to classify your whole family, but just thinking, we all have underlying motivations that are just very different from each other. And it's not that people are necessarily trying to hurt each other. It's that they may have just a different way of seeing things based on their experience. And if I can understand a little bit about that, I may take things less personally. I may have a better understanding, and I may understand how to relate to them. While being authentically myself, I may understand better that this person may speak in this way, and it makes more sense to be more matter of fact with this person because that's how they're going to see it. And I just think it helps, again, with relationships, which is something that's just really important to me.
Got it. So does everybody have one, before we get into the types, does everybody have one main type? Is that an accurate statement?
Okay, so I'm going to keep it brief because, for attention span reasons, I think it's not going to be helpful to go into everything. The Enneagram is very complex. So while it sounds funny to people, or when I first ever spoke to anybody about it, they're like, okay, so there's 9 types of people walking around. That's so basic. So the beginning of it will sound basic in that there are 9 personality types and everybody fits into one. And again, when you think of it from motivation, each of the 9 types speaks to a basic need. So it makes sense that there would be about 9 basic needs in the world in terms of what we're missing and what we're trying to fulfill. One really important distinction between types or within types is that there are many health levels. So you may know somebody who's the same core number as you, but is much less healthy. So there might be mental illness attached to that you don't have. There also might be someone way healthier than you. So you may meet somebody who you're like, wow, I would never guess that we're the same number. Like, I don't feel like we go about life the same way. Well, they may have worked on themselves and come to a higher health level. But again, I believe in hope. I believe in taking judgment out of things.
But
you
there
don't
is
have to see
one primary type per person. Is that correct?
So one primary type, there are differentiations within that just we don't have the scope for today of how they can change. But one of the basic things is health level. And again, you can get healthier. More awareness can lead to more health, more work on oneself, and what you've been through can lead to more health. And you can go up within your number to be much healthier about how you express yourself. About how you go about things, even though your basic need is still there. So the 9 basic needs are the 9 basic needs, but then there's a lot of differentiation within that. Again, just the scope of this conversation, we're not going to have time for, but it's certainly more complex than I'm going to be able to make it sound today. So just to clarify before I go into the types, this is just an introduction. And the way that I think is best to introduce is to go into the 9 types. But again,
and each 9 type has each need met, or each type is focusing on getting a specific need met.
So they're really focusing on getting the need met. Again, probably the healthier you are, the closer you feel to being having that need met or understanding the need. But it's kind of a life goal of sort of encompassing that into yourself. And I think when we go into the motivations and the needs, it'll be clear what that means.
Great. So let's go right into it. Sounds good.
Okay. So again, this is just a brief overview of each type. They're more complex than I can make it sound within this amount of time.
Like everything is more complex, right?
Exactly. So I feel like there's gonna be a question after. Like, I think I fit into this, but it sounds so simple. It's definitely more
assessments online that people can take to discover like their exact type, so to speak.
So there are, and I would say just be careful which, because some are definitely more like fun and not really as based in the people who really worked on it. Yeah. The book that I really, really enjoyed reading is called The Wisdom of the Enneagram.
Okay.
It's by Don Richard Russo. And he was a teacher of philosophy who really went into it in a way that, again, I think takes judgment out, really talks to the meaning, and is very like clear and understandable. So I'll like relate to it like all the time, just because it's one of those books that's also like fun to look through and be like, oh, okay, that totally makes sense.
Okay, sweet.
Okay, so we'll start with type 1. The order is not meaningful in terms of there's no ranking. It's not type 1 is better than type 9. There is a reason for the order. If you read any of the books or you look online, there is a picture. Numbers relate to each other in a certain way. So there's a very fancy diagram that I wouldn't be able to do justice to today.
Okay.
But it explains why numbers are near each other. So that's the only significance of the number, but there is no better or worse.
Got it.
Okay.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Sure. And again, each number is going to come with their challenges and their strengths. And it is not considered, according to the system, that any strength is better than any other and any weakness is better than any other. And when we are triggered by another number, we may come to think that way. But again, it's one of those many things when we're triggered, let's ask ourselves, who have I met like this that maybe it's hard for me when someone else acts like this? It usually, like we've said, triggers are the past coming into the present when we're having a difficulty with a personality, or we think, oh, I would never want to be like that. Often it's, I have met somebody who hurt me who was like that, and maybe there's something in here. So always worth looking through as well. Okay. With that said, so type 1 are people who can be much more matter of fact. They tend to see the world in black and white. They have a very strong moral code. So what's interesting about this is it's their moral code. It doesn't mean that they are following the rules of a specific system, although they can be rule followers, but they will follow their own moral code to the end. They can come off judgmental, but mostly they're judging themselves. So that sort of harshness sometimes is really them judging themselves. So they're used to seeing things that black and white way. And if you go against their moral code, it's a challenge for them. Their motivation, so their underlying motivation is to be good, to be seen as good. What they felt was missing often is that they didn't feel seen as good. Sometimes it could be like a childhood where just a very critical family. And so it becomes that black and white of, oh, my mom said I did this wrong. Okay, I should do it like this. And just really, really seeking that validation of I am good. I'm good enough. They can be very organized. They're often the mommy or daddy of the friend group. Those like take charge, very helpful, very practical. They're not super emotional. They're very, very logical. So this is really more your logical friend. But they take great care of people. They can be very level-headed. And again, so it could be a nice person to run your problems by. What could be a challenge sometimes is that black and white thinking. It's hard for them to see the gray. They can come off very critical.
Right. I'm like thinking of people I know.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's fun for that. Again, don't go over to everybody and tell them, but it does help. And again, what helps is sometimes when we're near those people, we're like, you're being so judgmental of me. Like what? And when we recognize that they're that judgmental of themselves, really, and that really they were taught to see the world in good and bad, it makes sense why they're constantly speaking that way.
Correct. I think that's just a piece on judgmentalness. I think if that's the word, judgmentalness. But I think that it really comes from people, when we're judgmental, it's because we're really judgmental on ourselves. I think it stems from the self. So I think that makes perfect sense to like whatever I've thought of before in terms of a judgmental person.
Yeah. And again, it can be triggering in an interaction if you're not like that, because it's like, why can't you see the gray? Well, you have to be taught to see the gray, and it goes the other way. People who see the gray who can't really see when there is a yes or no to something. So we're all just coming from where we're coming from. And this is, again, a perspective. Of course, some of their work is to see past the black and white, but this again is the nature to that.
Beautiful.
Okay. So type 2, their motivation is to be loved. They in some way didn't feel loved enough, and they're looking to really feel liked and loved by others. So that's what they're seeking out. That's the basic need. That's the motivation to what they do and how they do it. So this is the kind of person who will do anything for anyone. Very giving, very generous, the bleeding hearts. So when they're less healthy, they could need a lot of acknowledgement. So this can be where the friend will say like, oh, remember that time I like helped you move? Yeah, like you said thank you, but you know, it was really a lot. And again, that's in a less healthy state. It's not that everybody likes this like that needs it. But sorry, I'm just reading a comment.
Yeah, no, there was a long one that came in.
Yeah, sorry. I'm sorry that I can't read it in time. But I'll try to get to questions if I can. But yeah, so part of it, because they need that love, they sometimes need that acknowledgement. So these are people, again, who might not say things like that. That might be less healthy, but they really, really will need that feedback of, I see what you did. Because part of what they're doing it for is to really just know they're appreciated, know they're seen. They can be also the opposite of a 1 where they're very emotional, harder for them to see the logic. They really take things more in an emotional way. So that's the 2. Okay. The 3 are what's called the motivators. That's what the books generally refer to them as.
Okay, it's interesting. That's the one that has a name so far from everybody.
They all have a name.
They all have okay. Yeah. I didn't know. Okay.
Yeah, sorry. But I find that their name really encapsulates, so that might be why.
The type 1 was what? Moral?
Sorry. Type 1 is the moral. I forget right now what their name is.
Okay, sure.
The type 2 is called the giver. That I know for sure. And I didn't feel the need to give the name because it's just so encompassed that like it would be sort of more obvious. With 3, I think it encompasses them, but it also explains them a lot.
Okay.
So 3 is the motivator. So these are the people who could seem really perfect. If you have a friend who you're like, does she have any flaws? Like, doesn't seem like it. This is that person. So they're very action oriented. So what's interesting about them is they have a large capacity for emotion. They don't always feel ready for that. So instead, they can be a bit externalized in terms of being much more action oriented. Doers rather than feelers, even though, again, they have that capacity for feeling. So part of their work is allowing themselves to feel as much as they really could, and they really do. So they're great in terms of like, they will motivate anybody. Like, let's keep going. Let's keep doing the cheerleaders. their self-worth, for whatever reason, again, usually childhood based, is tied to their success, tied to their accomplishments. So it's very hard for them to slow down and, again, be emotional, be in the moment in that way, because their belief is, I'm as good as what I've done. If I succeed, then I'll make people proud. See if there's anything else. They can be chameleons, very charming, again, because they're really good with people and they can calibrate themselves to a situation and know exactly what to say. That's part of like the coming off perfect. It's like they will be the well-dressed, looking good, not have an off day kind of people for the most part, because there is that sort of calculation of, I need to succeed, and in every aspect of life. Doesn't mean that every 3 does it everywhere, but they're the most likely to. Because they really have that picture of, again, I need to succeed. I need to succeed all the time. Okay, so type 4, some people call it the aesthetic or something. There's a few names for them. Some call it the romantic. I don't know if I feel that any of the names purely fit, so that's probably why I didn't write them down. Type 4s are very creative, very insightful, empathic. They're the self-aware, the emotional thinker. They're highly emotional and highly in tune with other people's emotions. And there isn't an emotion to a 4 that's too much. So they're the find the beauty in the pain. Again, that very sort of artistic, creative kind of eye. Whether or not they go into an artistic field, it's that idea of, I can handle the pain. There is a beauty inside of that. Sometimes it leans a little bit melancholic, meaning a little bit sad, because other parts are more likely to either see the pain as logical, run away from it. They really will want to sit in it. They can often feel like something's missing for them. And again, that's part of their childhood piece. They generally were the kid who felt misunderstood. They're really, really looking to both be understood. So that's like the desire underneath. That's the basic need. They also feel so different. Usually, again, for whatever reason in childhood, they felt very different than others around them. So they also want to be seen as special and different, and they'll work to that while also wishing they were just understood for who they are and appreciated for who they are. So there's like this artistic need, this need to be different, this I'm very different than others, nobody gets me, but also like an underlying desire of just, I want to just be, I really wish somebody understood.
So interesting. Wow.
So 5s are called the observer. Their name also, it's one of those where the name really helps you understand who this person is.
Okay.
I think that, to me, this is a type where now I've met a bunch of people who are like this, but before I did, it was a little bit harder to understand. It's not the type of person who you walk around all the time. Like with 3, with the motivators, with the giver, you see those people very clearly. Like it's very quickly, right? You filled in a name. This is not that, because I think it's just less common. So observers who are 5s who are observers, it's they can be somewhat distant. They don't really need other people. It doesn't mean they're not good at relationships. They just don't have that need as much as other types. They're generally more introverted. Their interest is really knowledge. And their basic need is to feel competent. And one of their concerns is like not having enough time, not having enough resources. So what they would love is like to be able to learn a subject that they love for hours without being interrupted. It doesn't mean they wouldn't share it with another person or that they have to do it alone, but they're seeking out knowledge. This is real knowledge seekers. It's the kind of kid who takes apart like the huge Lego thing to figure out how to put it back together. Really curious people. And again, they can be super interesting because they will know a lot about something and they'll really care about the nuance.
And it's like about like one thing that they go all into, or is it just knowledge in general that they're after?
So that sort of depends on the person. They're generally really into knowledge, but they'll usually have like their things that they are really super interested in. And it's hard for them when there's a subject they really don't care about. They're not the small talk, again, because they don't have that piece. They can be very social, but they don't care in the way where like a 3 does to present super well all the time. They have an easier time being authentic. So if you're not talking about something they're interested in, they'd rather not. They'd rather utilize their time to do something what they feel is productive, learning about what they find interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So they can spend a lot of time alone. It doesn't mean they do. Again, like they may find a full group of people who love what they love and they're totally comfortable with that, but they're not going to find a full group who hates all their interests just for the sake of like having friends.
Being in a group. Got it.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a little more specific that way. But again, their main need is to feel competent. For whatever reason, they didn't come out of childhood feeling very competent. So there's that seeking quality to the knowledge of, I really know this. I really know this fully.
Sounds very similar to the motivator, just without that piece, like similar in the need sounds similar.
So that's where the motivation becomes very important. And in a motivator, it's I have to succeed. A 5 doesn't necessarily care to do well at things. It's more for myself. Do I feel like I learned it in a really full way? Do I feel like I know? I would say their difference is the more internal versus external. A motivator more cares how they come off to others. A little bit more thought about that.
Got it. Love that. Yeah, that's a good differentiator.
Okay, type 6, they're called the loyalist. So they are leaders. As you notice, like a bunch of the numbers could be great leaders. Any number can be. It's in certain numbers in terms of how much they would care to be or how much they would enjoy that. 6 is someone who really enjoys that. And they're the person who's doing it for the sake of the group. So they're not doing it because it's the right thing. They're not doing it because it looks good. They really believe that they have a lot of good ideas and the group is going to benefit from this. So they're much more able to see like the group picture. They're a little bit hard to understand because they have a lot of differences within themselves. For example, 6s will seek out authority to a certain extent. They have an interest in authority. They also will completely go against authority. There's a bit of a rebelliousness. And again, if we looked sort of like an attachment in early childhood, we would probably find why. There's probably something missing with an attachment kind of figure that then makes you seek out that desire, but also not trust it. Again, it doesn't have to be that way with every 6, but there is this authority piece where I really, really want it. I want that sort of safety of an authority figure. I also am not so sure I trust it. But they will, when they find one, sometimes really, really go with an authority and be like afraid of authority in general, though. But they will be able to sometimes, if they find the right one, connect really well to it.
So they're not opposed to authority, but they tend to generally gravitate towards it and then rebel against it.
They have a sort of fear of it and a certain love of it. So it's interesting because you'll meet a 6 sometimes and they'll sound like the kind of person who's super rebellious, who hates all authority. But when you get down to it, usually if they feel a certain safety, and their basic need is very much that safety. They're always looking for what feels safe. So one example of it is authority. In life in general, they're also the planners. Again, that's what makes them great leaders. They're always planning ahead. They're always thinking what could go wrong. It can come off a little bit negative, but again, in understanding the motivation, it's I want to protect myself and others. I'm going to think of anything that could go wrong so I could plan ahead. There's an anxious piece to them. They don't always come off anxious. It's not every 6 has to look super anxious, but there's an inner anxiety. I've had conversations with people who I may have thought were 6s where I realize they don't come off that way. But then they'll say, I really suffer from a lot of anxiety that nobody could see, right? And anxiety is one of those things. We assume that somebody anxious, like their hands are shaking and they're talking fast and you would know it. But there's a lot of people with anxiety who are like suffering in silence and it's not really noticeable. And a 6 could very well go either way, where it could be very noticeable or it's really just internal. And again, the way that it comes up
on themselves.
Yes, exactly. It's a responsibility on themselves. It's that I'm looking for safety all the time and I'm not so sure it's there. So I'm there's like a bit of a worry to them.
They're good vacation planners, maybe, though.
They're what?
Good vacation planners.
For sure, for sure.
Plan vacation.
Yeah, I think at the end of this, like if you've learned nothing else, you'll know who's good to plan a vacation. There's a bunch of them, right? Like,
yeah.
So 7s are the free spirit. So they're the people, what's interesting is they don't always come off this way, but they have a lot of depth and a lot of capacity actually for very deep emotion, but their fear is that they'll get drowned by it. That if they really allow themselves to feel like as sad as they could, that they'd get stuck. So they live a life a lot of the time where really what their basic need is joy. They're constantly seeking out happy, light, upbeat. And it's like a really interesting person. Like, you know it when you come across it, because it's a very full of life, very free spirited, really about the fun and the joy and the good in life kind of person. But when if you have a close friend like this or a family member, what you'll notice is they can have the deep conversation. It is within them. They won't keep it going for long though. So it's the kind of person where you speak to them for 10 minutes about something really deep, really heavy sometimes, and they really could go there, and very quickly they're on to like, let's go to Six Flags now.
Yeah.
And
Totally
again, it's that need of, I'm worried I'll get swallowed whole by this. And maybe they've had that experience where they've seen it happen to people. So it's, life doesn't have to be that way. I have the capacity, but I really prefer the lighter, the joy. And again, some of their work is sometimes learning that your emotions don't have to swallow you, that they ebb and flow, and allowing them in when they're there. But again, this is your fun friend. This is the party bird. This is the person who plans the best parties, who's just comfortable to everybody, in that they socially are not worried what anybody's thinking. And they're great at just being like, everybody, let's have a great time. It's like who you want to throw a party on any given day.
Got it. Okay. Might need one.
Yeah. We all need a few of them.
Yeah.
And again, if you're not like that, sometimes it feels like much. And it really helps to remember, okay, they're seeking this out because, again, they have that capacity. They could be very grounded. They could be very emotional. They can feel the negative. They're just concerned about that. So they're sort of pushing the other way. So the 8s, this is the ultimate leader. This is like who you want in charge. They are power people. They are the powerhouse of people. Can come off really intimidating. This is the person who doesn't really care. If they believe that this is the right thing to say, or it's going to get their way, they will say it. You want them on your side for sure. This could be a really helpful person. It can be very intimidating as an energy. It's very, very strong. What's their motivation? So is it just power? Are they just wanting to be in charge? It's really not. Their fear is being controlled. So much so that they can be controlling. So again, someone had mentioned, I think in that long comment about like abuse or abusive people, every number has potential to be extremely unhealthy. This is a number where we could see when you're very, very controlling, it can be very scary for others. Healthy 8s are not completely controlling. They will still like control. And again, because their fear is being controlled, but it doesn't have to be a scary thing. It can be. It doesn't have to be. It can feel like, this is who I want as a mom. Like, she is going to go into that school and nobody's going to say anything bad about me. Not because she's terrifying, but because she has that sense that this feels right. This feels loyal. I'm not letting that happen. I too can have control, can have a voice. So there's a very healthy way to use this kind of power. And again, like, this could be a lot of politicians. There's a very unhealthy way to use power like this. But these people really have the power, know how to use power, can really get things done. Like an organization, you want this person, again, like with any number, you want the healthier version. So it's an easy one to see, just because most people have come across an 8 who's less healthy. And you can see that sort of power grab. Like a Trump would be a really good example of like an 8 who's not healthy. Even if you love him, you know, it's not about the politics of it. It's just, again, that going out there. So that would be an example. But again, of course, it's not going to come to me right now. But there would be like a famous president, you know, perhaps a George Washington or somebody who would be the healthy version of, for the loyalty, for the sake of what's right, I will take control over a situation, be a leader.
How are they different than the leader, than the loyalist, the type 6 leaders?
So again, their motivation is different. The 6 is doing it more for safety. So it's not necessarily in the same level of like sort of strength of going about it. I would say the 8 could be a little bit more in your face about it, because their motivation is that fear of being controlled. That's their need, is to not be controlled. So the controlling is really a side effect. It's not who they are. It's that really, really at the end of the day, they don't want to be controlled.
Right.
So they kind of sort of have their own force of power by themselves. The 6 is more relying on the group. They're just leading the group. So it's not, doesn't come off exactly the
fear.
same.
That's the difference also, I think. Like the 6 motivation is not coming from fear, whereas and when we're acting from fear, things are like on steroids, you know what I mean? So like I think
So that's different. The 6 is coming from a fear of lack of safety, and again, the 8 is the
I
fear.
felt like more for the sake of the group, coming more from like a benevolent place, but you're saying it is fear, 6.
So they all have a fear. The 6's fear is a lack of safety. So, but it will come off different than a fear of being controlled, because you're likely to come off a little more controlling if your fear is the control itself. Whereas with a 6, the fear is the safety. So again, that's more of a group need.
Got it. Okay, so I take that back.
And again, in an 8, it doesn't mean it can't be a group need at all. There's like a lot of Holocaust survivors who are 8s. I think those are some of the greatest 8s I've met, where there's an obvious reason why they would have a fear of being controlled.
Exactly.
And the way it's a true blue survivor. That's not going to happen to me again. I'm going to give myself a voice. I'm going to find a way out where I get a voice. I tell my story my way, and I protect the group as well, but differently than a 6. It's really, again, a powerhouse survivor. So when I say like there's the less healthy, like some unhealthy politicians who have the 8%. There's like the super healthy survivor of the Holocaust. I'm going to make it my mission to help people with this need to not be controlled, because control could be super dangerous for us as a people. That kind of thing.
Beautiful. Thank you for that.
Sure. All right. And the last type is called the Peacemaker. This is a 9. I will say it makes for a great friend. They will give up their own needs for the sake of peace. So it's different than the 2. They will look similar. It's not the giver where it's like, I want credit because I don't feel enough love. The 9 is like, love me, don't love me, please just don't fight. So again, we can imagine in childhood where you would pick this kind of thing up. But their need above all else is peace. If nobody around me is fighting, if everybody gets along, if I want meatballs and spaghetti for dinner, but every other person wants macaroni and cheese, we're going to have macaroni and cheese, because I will feel better having no fights, having not hurt anybody, than getting what I want. So they're really able to give up a lot.
Wow.
Which makes them sound very perfect, right? It's so nice to be around. But what can be difficult about them is they can seem apathetic, because they're not going to necessarily stick their name to a cause. It's whatever makes everybody else happy sometimes. So it can come off as apathy. The truth is, underneath it all, they do have wants and needs of their own. But one of their huge wants and needs is peace. So they're just willing to give things up for this greater need that they have, which is peace. They can be a chameleon, because again, they're also going to go with what is better for the group. They also could be very objective. They're very good in that sort of like the way that a judge could see all the sides. They could see all the sides, because when they're trying to be peaceful, they're that person who could say, oh, I see it your way. Okay, I'll also see it your way. Can you see it each other's way, right? Can we help each other see that?
Ultimate peace.
The ultimate peacemaker. This is what they are. So they can have that objectivity where it's nice to run an idea by them, because they can see the full picture of things. They obviously have a lot of empathy. But again, the avoidance of conflict can be difficult for other types. There are other types who really do well with conflict. They really do well there. And also it helps them just understand and do well in that way. And this is a type that's not going to go there. They can be passive aggressive. They can say that they let something go, because again, the conflict is what's scary to them. So a lot of their work is being able to not just stand up for themselves, but, you know, if they're a mom, stand up for their children. Sometimes it's very hard for them to put themselves in a position where there's going to be any sort of conflict.
So interesting. I love that you explained the other side to it. You know, like on the outside, it sounds so like, oh, of course you want this person, you know, in your life.
Exactly.
But then it could also be, like some people thrive, like, you know, you want somebody to have some sort of voice and opinion. Like that's where you can either connect or you disagree, but then there's something there.
And that's the thing with all the numbers. And again, some of them come off, especially in this very immediate way, sounding better, or, oh, that sounds scary, I wouldn't want to be near that energy. But you do, because again, firstly, any number that's healthy, people at their peak health are extremely pleasant. They've worked on these things. They're utilizing it for a really good purpose. And again, any number, even if it sounds great, when you're in an unhealthy place, there's work to be done.
Correct.
So that's really the main thing. And some will come off better than others. But really at the crux of it, there are strengths. There is, if you put these 9 people together, they could be a powerful, powerful group. And there's strengths and weaknesses within all of us. And again, it's really all just based off our experience. What has led us to see the world a certain way, react to it a certain way. And when we understand that, I think even in just, these like sort of little spices, you hear there's a motivation. There's clearly something someone has gone through, something they're missing that they really need fulfilled to feel a little bit more whole. And this is the way they go about it. And it's generally not with malice. And again, like someone said, of course, anybody can be abusive. Anybody can be unhealthy. So that exists within any number.
Right. And the idea is not to change your type. The idea is to identify your type, see the strengths, see the weaknesses, double down on the strengths, and compensate for the weaknesses if necessary. Would that be?
And learn them. And I'm a big believer that weakness can be turned into strength. So that which you're utilizing, it's just how you utilize things. So any of the weaknesses is really just, it's great, for example, like to be action oriented. If you can have that emotional capacity, if you can learn that, it's still going to be great to have you be action oriented. You're still going to get a lot done. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just, am I seeing the full picture? So that's just an easy one to go with. But yeah, for any of them, they're really, weakness is when we don't have self-awareness, when we're not utilizing things properly. I'm not a big believer in that any of our traits are wrong. And that's why we don't have to change them. We couldn't change our number if we wanted to, is the idea behind the Enneagram, but we would never have to, because at the top of it, when we're utilizing our number correctly, when we're using our motivations correctly, we wouldn't want to change. We're such a great asset to have.
Got it. Beautiful. Thank you, Caryn. This was amazing. So much to think about, so much to digest. I took really good notes. I really appreciate it. Thank you. If anybody has questions, you can DM them to me or to Caryn. And if there are enough good questions for us to do a part 2 Q&A, we definitely will. All right, Caryn.
Thank you so much, Beck.
Sunday. Thank you, everyone that tuned in. Have a good one. Enjoy the day. Thank you. Bye-bye.